Welcome to Across the Curve.
When you line up safety, leadership, and excellence, that opens the door for lots of guests. And I personally feel that, there can't be a more valiant effort in the world than to protect and save lives. We hope the time that you spend with us will help you to understand how the future of work is shifting and what we can expect the workplace to look like in the coming years. Our guest today is Elliot Massey. Our guest today is Michael Yaffe. Angel is the VP of Global Human Resources at AdCourt Incorporated. Don is an executive safety and risk management professional with 4 decades of experience. Chester has been called the Apostle of Appreciation by Canada's Globe and Mail. Derek is an Emmy award-winning writer, producer, director, and actor. We hope the time you spend with us will help you to understand how storytelling is a key to learning.
Boy, storytelling is a wonderful topic, and let's explore the story.
Welcome to Across the Curve with Craig Sexton. Sponsored by DSS Plus, transforming business results through the development of a safe, efficient, and capable workforce. DSS Plus, protect, transform, sustain. Your host today has over 3 decades of experience in the entertainment industry from Los Angeles to New York. He is an award-winning writer, producer, and director. He has been recognized for his extensive work around the affective approach and communicating from the heart. He brings his talents to bear at DSS Plus with breakthroughs in communication, employee engagement, and culture transformation. He is everybody's best friend and soon to be yours. Craig Sexton.
Welcome, my friends, to Across the Curve podcast. I'm Craig Sexton, the Global Creative Director at DSS Plus, and we hope the time that you spend with us today will make you a better and more impactful leader, regardless of who you're leading. But first, I want to say hello to our producer extraordinaire, Jay Gates. Jay, how are you doing, buddy?
Hey, Craig. How are we today?
I'm doing fantastic, man. What about yourself?
I'm excited. This is my excited face, by the way. I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah, no, I can definitely tell that you're excited face because this is our maiden voyage, right? This is our first podcast, not only a podcast, but a video podcast as well. And, we're christening the ship today with a really, really special guest.
I mean, I love, he has maybe the greatest nickname that was given to him that I've ever heard, the Apostle of Appreciation.
Yeah.
I'm jealous.
How do we get a nickname like that?
I was thinking about that, Craig, and I know, your title comes up, and it's Craig Sexton, DSS Plus Global Creative Director, and I go, that's fine and all, but then, that's a little too official. It's not as fun as the Apostle of Appreciation. So I was thinking, maybe we come up with some different titles for us today, and so I was thinking, this would be a good one.
The
Prince of Paisley, I think, is a nice one. Or we get, this is actually my favorite one, the Ayatollah of Rock and Rolla, just, because of your extensive music career. I think that's it's very official. I myself, I'm going to be going as the Baron of the Beard.
Yes,
because I think it's pretty obvious this thing's getting out of control. So
yes, you are wearing that well. You're taking No Shave November just a little bit too far. But
hey,
man,
brother.
Jay, look, hey, I appreciate you and thanks for the job that you've done getting us here today on as I said, our maiden voyage of Across the Curve,
Absolutely.
Safety, leadership, and excellence. And just to give our audience a little bit of context really quickly about why we're calling the podcast Across the Curve, we're referring to the DSS Plus Bradley curve, which plots organizations in their cultural development along this graphic curve. Now, we're going to be getting into this in greater detail in episodes that are coming up, but it really does give us a pretty wide berth of discussion topics. That's why our little tagline says safety, leadership, and excellence, because There just isn't a more valiant effort in the world than to protect and save lives, and we'll be discussing leadership on how to become a better leader, as well as excellence, right? Not only organizational excellence, but excellence, operational excellence. So we have lots to cover, and we have some amazing guests to discuss these topics with. But speaking about amazing guests, our guest today, is Chester Elton. Now, he has spent 2 decades helping clients engage their employees to execute on strategy, vision, and values. In his provocative, inspiring, and always entertaining speeches, the #1 best-selling leadership author provides real solutions to leaders looking to manage change, drive innovation, and lead a multi-generational workforce. Elton's work is supported by research with more than 1 million working adults, revealing the proven secrets behind high-performance cultures and teams. Chester has been called the Apostle of Appreciation by Canada's Globe and Mail, creative and refreshing by the New York Times, a must-read for modern managers by CNN. And welcome to the show, Chester Elton. Chester, we are delighted to have you here today.
I've looked forward to this for a long time. Craig, I'm a big fan of yours. I love the Ayatollah of rock and roll. I've never met an Ayatollah before. I think that's a great title. And, one of the reasons I love spending time with you, Craig, is that you bring the joy and you bring the energy. I love in your, that little video that introduced you, soon to be your friend. I don't think you've ever met a stranger. You create relationships so quickly, and that's why people love to be with you. So I may be the apostle of appreciation, but you bring the love. And so thank you for inviting me to be a part of your podcast. I really am honored.
Chester, well, that's so nice of you to say, but look, it's really our honor to have you here. And I got to tell you, when our team was putting together this podcast and we started to have that first roundtable discussion about, who do you want to be your first guest? I just blurted out Chester Elton, no question. I mean, there wasn't a doubt in my mind. If I was going to launch a podcast, I wanted to do it with you. So look, we've got so much to discuss, and, there's just so much to talk about. Look, I want to jump right in, but I've got kind of a little quirky question for you, because when I heard you speak, I did hear you reference your parents a couple of times. So how would your parents describe what you do for a living, Chester?
It's a great question. My mom would call and say, "So where are you in the world today?" Because we travel so. I think my mom, and even my kids, when they'd say, what does your dad do? What does your son do? They say, he travels the world and he reminds people to say thank you.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I'm not sure how my parents would describe what I do, but I do know they would say, I hope you get a real job at some point. Right? Yeah. Well, look, Chester, I want to jump in to really talking about your book. And look, I just want everybody to know, if you want to make a difference, you need to get this book, Leading with Gratitude. It is really a fantastic read. And oh my gosh, just the opening comments and quotes that you got from other leaders around the world. Well, it's just phenomenal. And everybody loves this book. But, in Leading with Gratitude, you talk about these 8 leadership practices for extraordinary business results. Now, look, I know you've been interviewed a lot and people have talked to you about these 8 principles, but you know me, Chester, right? I take the road less traveled. And I was really drawn to the opening of the book where you discuss the myths around leadership. So that's where I want to drive our discussion today, if it's okay with you, because I'm going to make you work a little bit harder than you normally do. Because when we talk about one of these myths, I'd like you to find a thread maybe that links us back to one of the 8 principles. What do you say, Chester? You ready?
I'm game. And, that is so Craig that you would find the angle and the road less traveled. So, hey, I'm all in. Let's go for it.
Well, I know it's going to be a little bit different probably than the way you get interviewed normally about leading with gratitude. But let's take the first myth that I saw in the book, and it's called Fear is the Best Motivator.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Adrian Gostick, my co-author, and I, for over 20 years now, we've been studying culture. And you say, look, Fear is a great short-term motivator, and
Right.
there are times when it is absolutely appropriate. The building's on fire, let's get out. Okay, that, you want to put the fear of God in people to get them up and get them out of a burning building. The thing is, if you want to build a culture that lasts, if you want to build a culture where you can attract and retain really top talent, that short-term kind of motivation, that kind of pressure, that kind of fear, it burns people out and you lose them really quickly.
Right.
If we just could put the fear of God in them, boy, we could get those numbers. And by the way, there are people that have done it and have short-term results. You remember that the tradition was churn them and burn them. Right? You'd
Right.
go work for a really high pressure company and you'd have some success and you'd put it on your resume and you'd move on as quick as you could, because the longer you stayed, the more likely you were, to die. And
Right.
that's nobody's goal. I really loved the foreword that Marshall Goldsmith wrote for us in this book. And it ties into this idea of fear. He said, it's really interesting. As I travel the world, and whether I'm talking to billionaires or I'm talking to people that are parking my car or bagging my groceries, he said, there's one thing that we all have in common, and that is we all want to be happy.
Right.
We all want to be able to feel like what we do matters, that we make a difference, and that effort is noticed and celebrated. Well, the screaming and yelling, and the fear-based management, that just doesn't bring the joy. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, I can't wait to hear my boss scream at me today. I mean, that's
Right.
just,
Right.
it's not there. So you talk about a principle, back to the 8 principles. And the one that I think ties into this is that walk in their shoes.
Right.
If I've walked in your shoes and I know what it takes to get the job done, I'm less likely to scream and yell at you, right? Because
Right.
I understand this stuff. I'll tell you, great. And you've probably eaten at this restaurant, Craig, because it's a fun place. Have you ever eaten at a Texas Roadhouse?
Oh, I have, because when you're traveling along the interstate, that's one of your options.
Absolutely. And you go in and they've got, you can smell the fresh baked rolls and they put that cinnamon butter on it. And just all of a sudden, all your cares melt away, right? They've got the great music and the sports on the video screens. Well, here's the thing that I love at what Texas Roadhouse does. Everybody that runs they call them stores, not restaurants. Anybody that runs a store has to have done every job in that restaurant. You have to have bussed the tables, washed the dishes, cut the steaks, work behind the bar.
Right.
And when you have that kind of perspective, you're grateful for the people that show up and do those hard jobs. You know that when you make a request, you know exactly what it entails to get that job done. And I just love that. Walk in their
Right.
shoes, right? And you're less likely to be the screaming, yelling, put the fear of God into them guy that, let's face it, we all hate. Nobody wants to work
Yes,
for that
exactly.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody wants to be in that command and control environment. Yeah, that's well said. So, myth number 2, Chester, there's just no time to be grateful. I got a job to do.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, of all the myths, this one, if you had to say, what sticks in your craw? What
Right.
really, burns your bunions? It's this one. I don't have enough time, because we've always got enough time to fix something that went wrong. You say, hey,
Good. Well said.
yeah, you don't have time to tell Jay Gates that he's doing a phenomenal job as your producer, but Jay makes a mistake, man, you're on that in the New York Minute. I remember being in Atlanta, a guy said, oh, somebody makes a mistake on my team, I'm on that like a duck on a June bug, which I'm not exactly sure. Maybe it means quick, they're pecking at those, whatever. The point is I can't take the time to tell Jay's doing a great job. And I've always got time to tell Jay when he screwed up. You got to flip that over. And again,
Right.
It's really interesting. I think it's all about, one of our principles is assume positive intent.
Sure.
That people are showing up and they want to do a good job. And in trying to do a good job, they're going to make a mistake. And that's okay.
Right.
Because there are all these things you're doing during the day that are so good. Let's recognize, no, those guys, it's really interesting. One of my favorite leaders, and you've got to get him on this show, by the way, is a guy named Gary Ridge.
Right.
He's the CEO of WD-40. Like, we've all got a can. This is my travel version, right? Everybody's got the blue can with the red cap. And, the old adage that if you've got duct tape and WD-40, you can solve 90% of the world's problems, right?
That's right. You can almost fix everything, in your house, right? On a trip with WD-40 and some duct tape.
Right. I mean, if it moves and it shouldn't, you duct tape it. If it should move and it doesn't, it's WD-40. Well, Gary has this spectacular philosophy of assuming positive intent, and it's this, that we don't make mistakes at WD-40. We have learning moments. So when you assume that, look, there's a problem, and I want to solve the problem as opposed to know who to blame.
Right.
Well, you've got all this, goodwill that builds up. You're problem solvers, right? You're assuming positive intent, and you make sure that along the way, you're looking for those small wins, which is, again, one of our eight principles, right? I'm celebrating the small wins along the way. I appreciate all the little things that you're doing that gets that momentum going. Now, at WD-40, it's not a mistake until you do it twice, right? If you do it the second time, it's like, hey, maybe we didn't learn as much as we should have from the first one. My point is that who doesn't want to work in that kind of a culture?
Sure.
Where you're assuming that I'm working really hard. And by the way, along the way, you're going to compliment me and reinforce me and build that momentum. And sure, I'm going to make mistakes where we're going to have a tough conversation. That's okay. I've got this reservoir of goodwill.
Right.
And
Right.
You've made sure that you've taken time along the way. And that's that culture where, again, I believe what I do matters and I make a difference. And how do I know I've made a difference? You've highlighted it. You've shared it with the team. You've called it out. We've always got time to fix mistakes. Let's make sure we've got time to make sure that we recognize what's going right. Isn't that just a better way to live, Craig?
Yeah, not only is it a better way to live, but I'm a word guy, right? I'm a wordsmith. So words make a difference. And I just love what you said there about it's not a mistake, it's a learning opportunity or it's a learning event. And those kinds of words I talk when I'm speaking and talking to people, I tell them all the time, words matter. And those kinds of tweaks and those kinds of changes aren't expensive. They don't cost you anything. They just cost you a little bit of thought. So, hey, let's jump into the next one. And this is the one I love the most. Hey, I show my gratitude every other week in a paycheck. It's all about the Benjamins, right?
Yeah, if we would just pay them more, they'd stay, and then you interview these managers and you go, there isn't enough tea in China for people to work for you or enough gold in Fort Knox. It is really interesting that that's our default excuse. Well, if we just pay them more. And it's really interesting, I talk about my mom and dad a lot. They had such a huge impact on my life. And I was blessed to grow up in a ridiculously happy household. My mom and dad were happily married for 65 years. And just one of the great romance stories. When you get back to words that matter, I'll never forget my dad. My dad was just so smitten with my mother every day.
Right.
And he would say to me, he'd say, Chess, look at your mom. Isn't she beautiful? Isn't she talented? Aren't we lucky? Isn't she beautiful? Isn't she talented? Aren't we lucky? Those words that matter, right? And it's so interesting as you start to build that culture of leadership and gratitude that you want to make sure that you make all those little moments count. I think that as leaders, we've got to be aware that we will say things that we may never remember, that people will never forget. And this idea that I'm going to give you the excuse that if I just paid you more, it would be well. My dad had a great expression. He'd say, excuses, even when valid, are never impressive. And I just love that. We're striving for excellence. You talk about it at DSS Plus, right? Striving for excellence. Right. And you don't make excuses for excellence. And if your default is we're just not paying them enough, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Everybody's paying about the same. Maybe there's some bonuses. Maybe there's some of this and some of that.
Right.
Everybody's kind of getting paid the same. What's the difference? It's the culture. Do I feel valued? And leading with gratitude is the best way to do that. Did all that rambling make sense to you, Craig?
Oh no, it totally made sense. Plus, the part that one thing that you just said about your parents and about your father is he's actually modeling gratitude, right? He was doing that for you as a child. Look at your mom. Isn't she beautiful? Isn't she smart? Aren't we lucky? Right? He's actually modeling that for you, and look how you turned out. You've become the guru of gratitude, right?
You make an excellent point there about modeling. And this is where leadership is so important, because the way that you act as a leader gives everybody else permission to act the same way.
Good point.
And so that's why, back to what you said, words matter. Are you complimenting? Are you encouraging? Are you motivating? Or are you a fear monger? Or are you falling back on lame excuses like, well, we need to just give them a 5-cent raise?
Right.
Nobody's buying that. That modeling of behavior is so important, because if you're a screamer, you give people permission to scream. If you're
Right.
kind, you give people permission to be kind.
Well
A really
said.
good point. Yeah.
Well said. So, hey, let's move from myths to a little bit of some principles. And this is one that I think our listeners and everybody just needs to hear, which is this idea that one size fits all. Is it fair to show gratitude to your people all in the same way? Look, I'm sure you've got a strong opinion here, but does one size fit all, Chester?
It never does. It never
Never.
does. And it's so funny, oh, well, my dad would say, don't forget, Chess, there's nobody in the world like you. You are singularly unique, just like everybody else. Which I just love the way my dad would explain stuff. The point is that we are different. And in the book, we tell a great story of, when Adrian and I were first working together, we worked for a bigger company, and we wrote the company's first book. It was called Managing with Carrots. Now, I grew up in sales, and Adrian grew up in communications and writing and so on. And we didn't know each other particularly well, other than we both kind of grew up in Canada and we loved hockey. That was the glue that was holding this relationship together, right? So I grew up in sales where, you have banquets and award ceremonies, and it's fun, and you meet new people and the whole bit. And so I said to our CEO, I said, listen, this is our first book. We're bringing all our salespeople. It's the annual sales banquet. We should bring Adrian in. And, we were big on like watches and pins and rings and stuff. And I said, you know what? Men in Black was the movie bag, and Hamilton made this Delta watch. It was just really cool, right? So let's get Adrian a watch, because I noticed he didn't wear watches, right? And let's bring him in. He can meet the salespeople, a little time away from his family. This big gala would be fabulous. Present him this watch. Well, the fact is, Craig, those were all the things that I loved to do.
Right.
And still do, right? And Adrian is the complete opposite. I think one of the reasons that our partnership has lasted 22 years is because we really are polar opposites, and we live about 3,000 miles away from each other. So there's a lot of good dynamics. The reason Adrian didn't wear watches is because he hates watches. Like, literally, if you want a Men in Black pristine watch in its original case, Adrian's got one, because I gave it to him, right? He would much rather spend time with his family. He doesn't want to be at a gala where he doesn't know anybody and has to be effusive and out there meeting people. If we'd have known better, Adrian, we would have said, Adrian, here's some money. Take your family to a great restaurant, or take a weekend on us. And the last thing in the world we would have done was give him a watch, So mea culpa. Ask your people, if you had a day to do anything you wanted to do, what would you do? It's a great little insight.
Sure.
Some people don't want to watch. They want an assignment to work on a new project or develop a new product, or they want time with their family, And again, generationally, there are such differences. Just get to know your people. I'll never forget telling my dad, I had this job at a sporting goods store, and he said, do they like your work? Are you working hard? He said, Dad, they really do. In fact, I did so well, they're going to give me the weekend off. And he went, what? Chess, if they really loved your work, wouldn't they give you more hours? Or I could enjoy the weekend. The generational differences and the way you perceive what's good and what's valued are different. And as soon as you know that, boy, you take the time. And let me give you one quick example. So I'm working for Kent Murdoch. He was the CEO at the time that I was working for. And I traveled a lot. And I'll never forget, I'm in Dulles Airport. And you know the drill when you're traveling because you've done it. You got the wheelie, the backpack, you're on your front. And I'm looking for my connecting flight. And we're talking about some customer issue and we figure it out and close the call. My phone rings again right away. Caller ID, it's my wife, Heidi. The call you take no matter where you are, right? If you want to get to 65 years like my parents. So I said, honey, what's up? She said, you're not going to believe what just happened. A guy just delivered 24 beautiful, long-stemmed orange roses to the house. And then there's this pause, and she said, at first I thought it was from you. And Craig, I knew it wasn't from me.
Right. Well, I would have been tempted to take credit for that.
Yeah. Well, and I was curious, like, who did send them? You know what I mean? I'm on the road. Well, it was Kent, and I just hung up with him. And the card said, Heidi, thanks for taking care of all the big things at home. So Chester can be on the road and do big things for us. The sacrifice isn't lost on us. Enjoy the flowers. All the best, Kent. Yeah, there you go. 1, 2, 3. That's so sweet. Now, here's the thing. You talk about knowing, right? We wrote a book called The 24 Carat Manager. It was 24 roses, right? He knows we love roses. They were roses. Orange is our color. The roses were orange. Those little things made the world, made it all the difference, and it meant the world to us.
Sure.
He took
Absolutely.
He took the time.
Yeah, that's just, everybody has their own love language, right? I mean, that's really what that's all about. I've actually heard you speak about your kids before when you said, do I treat them all the same? Absolutely not. They're the 4 different points of the compass. So, I mean, the takeaway there is everybody has their own love language. Everybody has their own way of being appreciated. Take the time to get to know your people and what they value. But let's move on because so much more to talk about and so little time to do it in. How does gratitude and leading with gratitude impact the bottom line? Because I'm sure there's a lot of leaders out there listening right now that are saying, this all sounds great, but I've got to make my numbers. But I know you've got data on this.
Oh, absolutely. It's so interesting. If you just look at the turnover numbers alone, Adrian and I were just speaking recently to a company that has 96% turnover a year. I mean, You're replacing almost the entire company every year. How can you build a culture? Think of all the time that you're spending training and retraining. Turnover is in the cost of turnover is in the billions of dollars. You take a look and you say, okay, productivity and absenteeism, again, it's in the billions of dollars. If we can find good people and keep them, the impact of the bottom line just in turnover and productivity. Now, here's the other thing that I think is so important about when you get to numbers, and it's operating margin, right? We found that companies that had engaged employees that weren't just engaged, they were enabled and energized, that their productivity numbers were 2.5 times higher than companies with low engagement. So, I mean, take whatever your numbers are and times it by 2.5 times. Think of the innovation, think of the productivity, think of, and it's so crazy, Craig. You know what it comes back to? It comes back to, do I feel valued? Am I seen? Am I recognized?
Right.
Is my boss, and I know this is going to seem so soft, is my boss kind?
Right.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, Chester, when you say that, a lot of people listening are going to think that this is a softer, weak approach. Is it?
No, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. And you know that in your business. People, my dad sent me a cartoon one time with Snoopy, and Snoopy said, I love mankind. It's people I can't stand. Right? And people are complex. There's a lot going on. And it's the softer skills that allows you to understand that. Our follow-on book from Leading with Gratitude was Anxiety at Work. And anxiety through the pandemic just skyrocketed. You think of, anxiety, depression, addiction, self-harm, divorces, all that stuff was up.
Sure.
And it was because people felt alone. They didn't feel like there was anybody cheering for them. In that book, the 8th strategy was gratitude. Isn't that amazing? It always comes back to gratitude.
Absolutely. So, Chester, before we run out of time, I want to ask you this question because one of the things I loved about Leading with Gratitude was there was a lot of data in the book. I mean, just like you said, the soft stuff is the hard stuff, right? But there was a lot of data and science here. So could you give us one of your favorite gratitude statistics of all time? What would that be?
One of my favorite gratitude statistics of all time. It's interesting, Craig. I had to take a stats class at the University of British Columbia. And that was a freshman required class.
Right.
And I was in the half of the class that made the upper half of the class possible.
Well, okay, look, hey, I'm going to show my hand here a little bit because I read this one. It's the 150% more likely statistic.
This was a study by the University of California. And thanks for leading me to the water there. I really
That's
appreciate
okay.
that.
Yeah, it's what I do.
Yeah. She said, look, when you're happy and engaged and motivated at work, you're 150% more likely to be happy and motivated in your personal life. And that is so true. Adrian and I talk about it all the time. It's the ripple effect.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing. I mean, that's worth repeating. That's a mind-blowing statistic.
Yeah, 150% more likely to be happy in your personal life. So as a leader with all the responsibilities you got, I'm going to give you one more. Send your people home happy.
There you go.
Because the ripple effect of their families and their communities is so extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, before we get out of here, we've got to wrap up here quickly. But I've got two more questions I want to ask you. If there was just one thing that you could leave our audience with, sharing out of Leading with Gratitude, what would that be?
Do it often. Don't be afraid. So often we say, if I do it too much, it'll lose its impact. Well, you know what? All these little drips are all these little I love yous, and it's never wasted. And I want to share with you one really personal story. It happened just recently. And it's this. I was lying in bed Saturday morning. We didn't have the grandkids over. We had some time. And I asked my wife, I said, honey, when I die, because clearly I'm going to die before you. You're in great shape, right? The guy always dies first. What are you going to miss the most? And she said, you know what? I've actually thought about this. And you know what I'm going to miss the most? All those little encouraging things that you say to me every day, all the little I love yous, all the little you look great today. Aren't you clever? Wasn't that a great meal? She says, I'm going to miss all those little bits of encouragement. So as leaders, don't forget all those little drips. They build up and they make a difference. And that's what creates a culture of gratitude that people want to be a part of and that they leave and go home and they're happy. Craig, we always say, it's not just a better way to lead. We've got all the numbers and the stats to prove that.
Right.
It's just a better way to live. And that's what we really hope people take away from the book.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there. The one idea that you talk about in the myths is, hey, I'll be bogus. This is not my authentic self. People will think I'm bogus. But as you just said there, the little drips along the way, it's repetition, right? It's like doing reps like a professional golfer or a basketball player or any athlete. It's all in the reps. And the more you do it, the better you get at it, the more authentic it will become. And it will just become you and your people will accept it. So, don't shy away from it. But Chester, I'm thinking if Chester Elton had a billboard, what would it say? If we funded you to have a billboard on the side of the road, what would you put on that billboard?
You know what? That would be, Craig, my birthday's in September. That would be like the best birthday present ever. If you could figure that out. You know what I would put on there?
Well, let's see what you're going to say.
Yeah. You know what I would put on there? I have a little mantra every morning when my feet hit the ground. I say to myself, be kind, be grateful, be of service. And to me, that was the essence of my dad. He was just so kind. He was always so grateful. And he said, Chess, the people that you don't love are just people you haven't served yet. You loved being with my dad because you didn't walk away thinking he was the most interesting person in the world. You walked away thinking you were the most interesting person in the world because he was kind, he was grateful, and he was of service. That's my billboard.
What a great billboard. Chester, look, I want to have you back because today we just talked about leading with gratitude. I know you have a new book called Anxiety at Work, which is fascinating. And so promise me you'll come back one more time so we can dig into that, or promise me you'll come back a lot. I want to talk to you more.
You know what? Time with Craig Sexton and Jay Gates is always engaging. It's always fun. It's always time well spent. You know, when you call me and I've got that caller ID, I will always pick up.
You got it. You've got it, my friend. Well, hey, let me be the first one of the day, or the last one of the day, or of this hour, to send you all of my gratitude and thank you so much. I know how busy you are with speaking engagements and writing books and things to do, and a lot of people are demanding of your time, but I just want to express my gratitude for you being here today. It means the world to me for our first podcast. And again, thanks.
You got it, Craig. Anytime.
Alrighty, buddy. And while we're talking about gratitude and thanks, I want to thank you, Jay Gates, our producer, as I said, extraordinaire, and to the rest of the DSS Plus team who made this podcast possible. And if you found the information today and the insights of this podcast helpful, well, please share it with others who could benefit. And don't forget to subscribe to our weekly podcast wherever you find your podcast. Across the Curve was brought to you by DSS Plus. And for more information, just go to consultdss.com. That's CONSULT DSS.com. I'm Craig Sexton, and that's how the story was told to me, and now it's been told to you. Take care.